Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm happy to do the usual sharing of the agenda today, and let's look at this. It's good to see everyone or have you here in the call. And thanks for everybody's flexibility in doing this on a Tuesday instead of Monday. Okay, here's our agenda for today. We've got a bunch of stuff we wanted to get through. We want to, in particular, look at the agenda for next Monday. We're going to spend 6 hours together, so let's make sure we're setting ourselves up for the kind of meeting we want to have as a council. Um, Jane and Liz want to walk through one more time the drafting and writing responsibilities. I'll leave it to Jane and Liz to explain exactly what we're going to look at this time. I think it's some updates there. We wanted to spend just a little bit of time now thinking about February 10th. Some questions came up about how to make that work and like whether we invite people to present and things like that. So we just wanted to get your initial feedback on that, particularly if we're trying to invite folks. We're gonna have some public comment at 9:45. Um, and then we wanted, assuming we have time for this, we wanted to do a first round of this conversation, which came up. Liz Miller, you actually kind of threw this conversation out there at our last council meeting about the date to deliver the climate action plan, and what might it look like if you all made a decision that was not July 1st. There was some sort of um, thought around how to make flexibility into this process, given the legislature's simultaneous work. So we've put this on the agenda for next week, but I thought it might be interesting to you as a steering committee to start to think about how we have that conversation and the way to think about it. Okay. This is not the right thing at the bottom of this. I'm not quite sure what happened. There must have been a cut and paste problem there. Apologies for that. It's an error on that text. So that's what we had for our meeting today. Before we jump into this, any quick questions or thoughts about today's agenda?
Cool.
Look good? Okay. We do need to approve minutes. They're here. I can even click through to them. Um, and let me just say, does anybody need a moment more to click through the minutes? Um, any concerns?
I'm pretty sure that's the one I missed. That's the only thing I wanted to note, if it
Okay.
was the one that occurred while I was traveling.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
not listed.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any concerns? Jared, thumbs up. Great. Anyone else? Julie, Kelly, any concerns with the minutes?
No concerns.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let's treat those as approved. Thanks, Kelly. I see a thumbs up there too. Okay. All right, so let's dive into it. This is the sort of thing we absolutely need to do today, which is look at this agenda. I pulled together an agenda based on what I heard in the council meeting last, whatever that was, week or 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to walk you through it and get your feedback on it. And so let me just walk through it for a little bit. And Jane and I and Liz Amler had a conversation about this as well. First of all, we have taken on board the idea of a 6-hour in-person meeting, starting not on the early side for those who need to drive in from farther destinations. So starting at 9:30, going to 3:30. Apparently, Liz Amler, we can have lunch, right? You're sorting it out.
Oh, yes, lunch will happen.
Okay, great. And so what we've thought here is this kind of flow, right? A heavy emphasis on the full list of recommendations and spending some time with those full Excel sheets coming out of the subcommittees. This is one of the key times we have to really spend a little bit of council time making sure that those full sheets are okay. There's kind of an assumption that things move forward unless they absolutely require a conversation, but we need to create the space for that conversation if things need to happen. Liz Amler sent out an email on Friday, And that email to the council included some instruction about some prep work for this. And if you want to, we could look at that instruction right now, because I think we're going to spend this chunk of time here on the full list of recommendations. And then after the break, we're going to spend another chunk of time on it. And so basically everything before lunch, we want to dedicate to those deep Excels. And let me just share Liz's email to everybody. Give me one sec so I don't unintentionally share all of my email with everybody. Okay, so this is what Liz sent out to the council on Friday. So folks are probably just seeing it now because it went out at 5 o'clock on Friday. So there's some pretty specific pre-reading instructions for next Monday. And essentially it's saying, could you please look through the detailed Excel documents? Don't spend a lot of time thinking about the priority actions that are already presented to the council in December. Like, kind of just skip over those. We'll have time to keep talking about those. And then on those non-priority actions, really try to pick up anything that is giving you enormous heartburn, either because it's concerning or you think there's just a massive missed opportunity in the way that thing is being framed. And we created a little way for folks to, even ahead of the meeting, flag these issues. And that's this Google Sheet here. And I'll share that in just a moment. And it's just an easy way. If you go into one of these documents and you see something you really want to have a conversation about, you can just literally cut and paste it into this Google Sheet, and that we can populate that ahead of time and get a sense of what we need to do. We are going to make some reading time next Monday as well, but not enough to really do this. So, and again, the default posture is that everything moves forward, included in that table, which will be a annex to the plan, unless you as a council feel like you absolutely need to have a conversation about it. So let me just pause for a second. And as you're looking at these instructions and you're thinking about what we're asking in terms of the pre-read, I'd be interested in feedback, steering committee members, about this preparation and about what we're trying to do here. Kelly?
Question, just for those who are more of an expert than I, is this Google Sheet going to have any issues with the public meeting requirements? Like if we're all working on a document together?
Yeah, it doesn't, because you're not actually debating anything. You're just cataloging things you want to talk about.
Okay.
So
I
it's like
I'm not 100% on that, David.
oh, really? Oh,
Google Docs have always been completely against public meeting law because it is technically viewed as collaboration.
yeah.
What has typically worked as if one person takes information, but if you can all see it at the same time, it's viewed as collaboration. I'm sorry that I missed that, but let me just, I don't know. If anyone, including the secretary, has a strong opinion, but otherwise I'll just check with Catherine, our general counsel.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I don't want to make a mess of this. I think the way I was thinking about it is this is not a collaborative document in the sense of we're not editing, we're not doing anything. We're just like, it's a deposit, it's a place to deposit agenda items.
The problem would only come up if if the council was meeting a quorum when they were in it. It's weird rules like that apply.
Okay.
But yeah, but I can't imagine that would ever happen, actually. So I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I do think it makes sense to check with Catherine, please, James.
I will. Thank you.
So the clear intent, just so everybody's clear, is not to real-time collaborate or asynchronous collaboration in the document. That is not the intent. It's like, probably we could just turn it into a survey form or something if we're getting some negative feedback about that. And thanks, Kelly, for bringing it up.
My suggestion is a survey form might be easier and not, getting too close to the line. if
Okay.
that's just
Yeah.
a thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kelly. Yeah. Jared?
Um, thanks, David. My question, I may be jumping ahead a little bit, but when I think about some of the issues that might be flagged for further review and discussion that, various members of the council may have concerns about some of the draft recommendations, I'm wondering about the process for exploring and trying to come to resolution on those, because I think that some of them are likely topics where full council discussion would be valuable. So, everybody is part of the conversation and it's a broad, it's an area of broad enough awareness and interest. I think that it's possible that there are other issues that fall into kind of a narrower or more specific set of concerns. And I wonder in that instance, like we were talking recently about the recommendations that Ryan Patch presented on net emissions accounting as opposed to the way the law is written around gross emissions accounting. And it feels to me like, that could happen in the full council, but it feels to me like there was a next step identified there where additional subcommittee work would happen. I wonder if there is a kind of in-between option where I don't know about breakout groups, like if we identify multiple questions or concerns that counselors could kind of self-select a breakout group to try to identify what the questions and concerns are, try to get on paper some options or some next steps. But there seem to be three buckets of possible paths forward for exploring and trying to resolve those. One is full council discussion. One may be great breakout groups at the meeting. But I think that there's also a possibility that some of the more detailed, in-depth, thornier pieces may need additional subcommittee research and deliberation.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. And I certainly, in my mind, had imagined when we get a sense of really what the suite of issues are, that there would be probably groups that would go off and try to resolve it. Just in the image you're saying, Jared, where it could be that just there's a handful of folks who really care deeply and have the expertise to work on it, and they go off and work, and they can do some simultaneous work that way. Probably everything comes back to the council, right? And to say,
course.
hey, this is what we did. This is how we written. So the full council gets to say yes. But my guess is there's going to be, you know, varying degrees of interest and concern, and we can work simultaneously through those in some smaller groups. And if there's something that's really big, probably ask a subcommittee for help. And it may even be very connected to something that's a priority action. And so it's actually connected to that.
Yeah.
Jane?
I was just going to respond the way you did, David, because we certainly talked about that and made the request of having some CAO staff to participate to help facilitate smaller group discussions around issues pertaining to their area of expertise, the subcommittees in which they served on. So, for instance, Evan and Marion will join the staff, the in-person council meeting to help with those breakout groups for rural resilience and agony.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
And I'll handle cross sector.
Okay, so all right, so what I'm taking away is the Google Sheet raises this sort of red flag, so maybe we should quickly switch that over to a survey mechanism. The way we're going to be working through those issues, we should take advantage of potentially working in some smaller groups and simultaneously and those who care and have the expertise to work on it. Okay, anything else in terms of how we want to have this conversation around all the detail on these Excels? Okay. All right, so the other piece of, let's go back to the agenda then. Give me 1 second. I have not been looking at the chat, by the way. Is there important things there? Okay. Okay. All right, so that gets us through the morning. After lunch, we wanted to do the public comment in the ways that we talked about it at the council meeting. And we thought it'd be important to do, or I thought it'd be important to do a good chunk of time. Maybe we don't need it, but if people are traveling to observe and they want to say something, let's make time for that. But we will keep that 2-minute time limit just so we can get the maximum number of folks. A couple other conversations we thought would be helpful when we're all together. We're calling this sort of an approach to prioritization. It's interesting, the exercise we ended up doing in the subcommittees was to really try to get subcommittees to have a reduced number of high priority actions lifted up to the council, and they all did it really well. It's resulted in about 50 priority actions. And so I think it's an open question in my mind. I'd be interested to hear your all's view on this from a steering committee standpoint. Are we more or less hitting what we want to hit in terms of a number of priority actions? Would there be a reason to try to tighten up prioritization or not? And also, can we create a little space as a council to say, you know what, when we look at what the subcommittees turned in, actually, maybe I'd drop some off this list or I'd add some to this list, and we create a little space to do that. So that's what this is about. And I'd be curious, if that seems like a good use of time. We don't need to solve this right now, but I certainly don't have an answer. Like, oh, we need to get down to 40 priority actions, or we need to get to some number. That's not clear at all in my mind. And I'd just be curious if this seems like a good set of conversations, and if so, how would we want to frame this up to do this conversation? I want to make sure everybody who's listening to this call also knows that the full suite of pathways, strategies, and actions will be included in the climate action plan as a table attached to the plan. So what we're talking about now are the priority actions that are lifted up in the main body of the plan. Everything also goes in the plan. It's just which ones get lifted up and highlighted in the main body as requiring urgent attention. So with that, steering committee members, any thoughts about this conversation? Does it seem useful if we do it? Any suggestions about how to do it? Jared? Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm happy to defer to whoever.
Liz, were you trying to jump in?
Only because I'm in the car. I apologize for the lack of hand.
You're good.
I think my question is, and maybe climate office staff has done this, it feels like there's some areas of overlap, not so much conflict, but perhaps duplication or overlap that could be tightened. And it's a slightly different question than yours, David. I don't know if it's included in what you're thinking, but that's something that feels like it should happen too.
Yeah. Yeah. To take that bigger look across all of them, and can we tighten it up based on that? Yeah. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll be ready for that conversation, David, because I assume that the work in the morning of talking about which items need to be elevated that maybe hadn't been before may not be fully resolved, and sort of honoring that there may be work group work needed to kind of ready them for the council to truly be able to consider them. I think just to me suggests this conversation may not be quite ripe for next week.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Julia. Kelly? And thanks, Jared, for jumping in the back of the line there. Kelly?
Yeah, I think Secretary Moore has a good point. I do think we might be able to have a preliminary conversation of, we just talked about a bunch of things that weren't on the initial priority list. Do we think some of these should be on the priority list? I think that's a fair thing to have at that point in the agenda. And then the thing I was thinking about is, I think you're right, David, that there's not like one clear answer about a certain number of priority actions, because it's going to depend on how urgent, what's going to have the biggest impact. But some things with the biggest impact may be a big lift, whereas there might be some things with a smaller impact, but they're relatively easy to implement and we should do them too. So I think that's where like the number is kind of going to fluctuate based on the actual things on that list. And there may be some really nice low hanging fruit that has a medium sized impact that is just like, oh gosh, let's just do it.
Right. Right. Thanks, Kelly. Jared?
Thanks. Yeah, I generally agree with Secretary Moore and Kelly on this. I mean, part of me feels like I don't know if this is really ready. I mean, I think this conversation could probably be started. But, on the one hand, I think the subcommittees did a lot of work to identify and kind of narrow the list of priorities. And I wouldn't want to kind of arbitrarily or dogmatically say we need to go even farther, especially given the amount of ground that the cap has to cover. I wonder if, one thing that I wonder about is if we basically end up with a list of priority recommendations that's not far off from what it is now, but that in addition to that, we identify something like top priority actions within the priority recommendations that most speak to what the statute asks for. I'm remembering, I'm looking at this language from the GWSA, and I wonder if there's a top 5 list of recommendations in terms of reducing emissions and a top 5 list of recommendations related to building resilience and preparing communities, in terms of the 2 main categories that the plan. There might be other ways to organize it, but I just worry that given the amount of work that's already gone into narrowing, that asking to narrow even further, I'm not sure about the utility of that or the efficiency of that versus just having yet another level of identification of impact and priority from that list.
Nice. Okay. Yep. Kelly?
Thoughts on that? And I also wanted to circle back to what Liz said, because I think that was another good point. This could be an opportunity to say, hey, do we notice some areas of big overlap? And what should we do about that?
Yep.
So we're not we're not trying to duplicate efforts here. A thought I had is there's a group that I've been a member of that has used different ways of figuring out prioritization of actions. And oftentimes it'd be like, these are our top ones that we definitely want to get, these are where we're going to put all of our energy. And then there'd be a next level that are like, these are important. And maybe that's where you have those ones where it's like, these should be easy. It's an easy win. Let's put some energy behind it, but we don't need to put all our energy behind it. And then some that are like, we're watching these are important. They're probably going to come up next time we go through this list of actions. And so having 3 tiers rather than just 2 might be a way to do this. But there's also been categorization, like, as I said, it sort of depends on like how much of a lift it is and how much energy. And of course, we're not doing the work here, like in this group that I'm referencing, but to give some guidance to the legislature and the administration about what we're thinking about where to put the most time and energy, but also don't forget about these. They're still really important and they should be easy wins. Let's do those too. And then these ones are maybe down the road. So another thought that takes a lot more time and energy, but it might be useful and help some folks who are like, this is super important. We can't we can't not have this be a priority. So it may help people feel more comfortable going forward if we take a little time for something like that.
So what I'm hearing is there could be value in having a preliminary kind of conversation around what you're talking about, all of you are talking about right now, and not try to assume that we can do a very thorough exercise around that sort of second sentence that's in here. But I think getting some clarity of like what the end goal should look like and making sure, one thing I will continue to ask, like Kelly, like with suggestions like that, I'm like, wow, do we have enough time to do that? Right? If we look at our meeting schedule, like that sounds cool. And do we have enough time to do it? So I think having like a real look at that, knowing that, we only have a certain number of meetings before we're supposed to get a draft plan out the door, right? Okay. Okay, if I move on, it sounds like a preliminary thing would be helpful. Just don't make it sound like we're ready for prime time and actually doing all this work right now. Okay. This is one thing. I'm working with a colleague, Indra. Several of you know Indra from his work with Just Transitions Subcommittee. And he's part of the CBI public engagement team and facilitation team. He and I don't have a specific exercise to share with you right now, but the general idea here is taking advantage of you all being in person as a council, and how can you talk with each other in ways that build a sense of some shared purpose in this in a more sort of human way, because you're going to need as much of that sort of connection and sort of sense of group over the coming months as you can get. Like as much as you can get would be great. So we don't know exactly what that looks like right now. We're working on that. But essentially it's just trying to get you all as a council talking with each other in ways that you can build a little bit more, or not, you can build in person some shared sense of goals around this effort. Any feedback on that, or things that we should aim for or avoid as we nail down the specifics of that exercise? Okay. Now, in this, we have actually time on our agenda today to do a first little teaser of this, but Liz Miller brought this up in their last council meeting, saying, this is very awkward timing with the legislature just finishing up just before our due date. And there's kind of this interesting give and take between you all as a council providing guidance to the legislature, but you all as a council also needing to recommend things that are coherent with what the legislature actually ends up doing. So it's kind of an interesting little dance there. So we don't need to go into it right now in terms of the content because we have it on our agenda to talk about in just a moment. But I'm curious if you're comfortable putting this as an agenda item on for next week. Jane?
I have two comments. One, I think this should come from a counselor. It should not come from me and you, David.
Yeah.
So that's a question to the steering committee. It should, if Liz is comfortable, then that's great.
Right. It shouldn't say David Plum and Jane Lazarus.
Yeah, exactly. We're neutral in this. And then I'll just say that two things about this, and we're going to talk about it more on this agenda. I flagged this for David and when we were discussing the agenda. My comfort level would be to move this to the top of the agenda, largely because I don't want to walk away from this meeting if the council is thinking about changing a timeline, not having had that decided upon, because the work to administer and move the work forward, needs to be planned by our office. So I'm fine if it stays at the end, just don't want to move it. You all can decide. And then ask of Liz if she would talk about it. And my final comment, just quickly, is that I think there are legal implications around the GWSA and requirements. Secretary Moore was comfortable with me reaching out to our general counsel to provide a legal memo to you all as a council for this conversation. So our general counsel will be drafting that, and I'm meeting with her later this week to sort of talk about the considerations here. Because one obvious example was if you meet the statute in some way by July 1st, but don't submit a plan with recommendations till August 1st, like I'm not quite sure how the rulemaking timeline works, like because it's tied to July 1st and a year from there. If there were rules in the plan, for instance, does that shift? Those are questions that I have.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah. So where it is on the agenda is a live question, and who's actually bringing it to the agenda? Jared?
Thanks. A couple of thoughts. I mean, my sense is that it wouldn't be our decision to change it would be our decision whether we want to request a change to the due date from the legislature. I think as long as the statute is the way it's written, my sense is we need to abide by that July 1st deadline. So I don't think this is our decision alone. I think it's a decision about whether we'd want to request it and whether that extension would be granted. The other thing that I'm aware of is that, I mean, maybe this is just me personally, but I think it would be more trouble than it's worth to move the due date from like July 1st to August 1st or September 1st. I know that and I imagine other people have already made kind of summer plans based on the expectation that July 1st was our due date. And I would worry about the kind of attention span and availability of counselors in July and August when we really want to be focused on landing this. If it was December 1st rather than July 1st, that would be different. But I would be really hesitant to have a due date in the middle of summer when there's already plans to be away, and we're going to deal with attendance issues and attention issues. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I hear and agree with many of the initial observations that Liz made. I personally wonder if at this point it would be more work and not as much benefit to just go ahead rather than trying to switch things.
Thanks, Jared. Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in a parking lot now. So I just wanted to say, I think my initial comment might have been expanded through this conversation, and specifically what Jane raised and the general counsel opinion and all that stuff. I believe at least what I intended to say was that it felt like a really, really tough and potentially problematic timeline between now. And I think I remember saying, recognizing that we have a July 1st deadline, but that the legislature will be meeting. Some of the conversation at the legislature includes the GWSA. So my initial point was more about making sure that we look at the interim timeline and in my opinion anyway, not assume that we can come out with some well thought out, defined public plan on the timeline we had, given everything else going on, even if that meant squishing things on the back end, recognizing the date. So I just want to reframe. I was not suggesting, I don't remember suggesting moving July 1st. That's a statutory deadline. The legislature may do that. And if they do that this session, we'll know that by sometime in May. And obviously then things would shift. But it was not an intention that the council somehow move that date. Instead, we're in control, as it were, of our schedule between now and then. And while tight, there is still time. And I feel like we may not be recognizing some of the difficulty in presenting things the way we're planning to at the moment, while there is still uncertainty and discussion at the legislature that, after all, would have to lead this. So it was more a between now and then thing, to be short of.
That's helpful, Liz. I definitely interpreted it a little bit differently when you said it, so I appreciate the clarification. Liz, when you think, what conversation would you like to have with the council? Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I had raised it as, I think that we had heard a number of times, even in the meeting, about I think the word uncertainty or some version of that came up a number of times while folks were talking. And it was in that context toward the end of the meeting that I just said, look, maybe we're not having all the conversation we need to about the timeline, because here we are uncertain, not, a number of people, myself included, on the survey, we're not certain how to proceed. It just felt to me that there that we had not done everything we needed to do in light of what was happening at the legislature and some of the conversations there to really be ready on the schedule that had been set. And recognizing that some of this is literally at the legislature in terms of the GWSA and whether there are any amendments, and certainly all of that could affect what ultimately the council is asked to do. And meanwhile, here we are sticking to a schedule and having difficulty with it. So at any rate, that was what I raised. I had
Okay.
thought.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Liz. Kelly?
This is just somewhat related, and I know we've had this somewhat on our agenda during other legislative sessions, but potentially it would be helpful for folks if we have a specific time set aside for legislative updates at all of our meetings. Just like these are the bills that are related to our work that we want to keep an eye on. Here's the progress on them. I know a lot of us are keeping an eye on certain ones, but not all of us are keeping an eye on every single one. And so just to have that so we know what might be coming down the pike that might affect our recommendations, our schedule, and all of that. Like if we know that this bill isn't going to be decided on until May, and it's going to potentially completely shake everything we're working on for a specific priority, we may be able to do some extra work on other areas while we wait and not just do a bunch of work that then gets thrown out the window. So that I think would be helpful for me to have the regular updates from somebody who's tracking all of these different things going on in the legislature.
Okay. So if I were to summarize this, it sounds like we've framed this not in the best way, or certainly not in the way that was intended. This conversation probably is helpful to talk about timelines and sequencing and the implications of the different things that are going on in the legislature and how we want to proceed given that reality. We're not specifically testing people's appetite on like moving a date, which, as Jared said, is kind of, first of all, not our date to move. So if we were to reframe this in that sort of discussion about the timeline and the realities of what's happening this session and the kinds of things that are under debate in this session, and what that means, how we want to prioritize, use our time, would that be helpful? Have that conversation? And we can just change it to timeline and, something about coordination with legislative agenda or something like, or legislative timeline.
Yeah, it's Liz. Sorry.
Yeah.
That could be helpful. I'm wondering, I'm interested in others' opinion. Is it as specific as whether or not we'll actually have a public draft the council embraces by the time that's been set? In other words, like that feels difficult to me. And it's a specific question on the timeline. Because it's right now supposed to be drafting completed by March 1st, right? Before even the
yeah. Draft chapters writing by March 1st. A draft
Right.
plan would go out to the public as a draft by, April 1st-ish.
Right. But again, like that first draft is supposed to be done even before, I don't know. That's maybe a more specific question, but I'm interested in others' feedback. I'll stop.
Yeah. Others' thoughts on this? Julie?
Yeah, I worry a little bit about that in terms of kind of our overall process integrity and bringing a document out for public comment. And I think we could caveat it in a way that acknowledges that it may be an area of active discussion for the legislature, but I think we still have to build a plan that we are asking for the public to react to. And so there is a fine line that we're going to have to figure out how to walk there.
Right. And I think one of the things as a council you could talk about is in that draft where you put caveats and those kinds of things to say, hey, this is something that's live in the legislature and the way that that goes down, blah, 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 right? So you could caveat a lot of this stuff. Kelly?
Anyone know off the top of their head when the crossover date is for the legislature, for the session?
It's usually the week after town meeting.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
second
that's
week
what
in
I-
March.
so, okay, so by the time we meet in person in March, would that have happened? Do
No,
we know which bills made it? No.
I don't think so. We
I
meet
don't think
really-
so. And yeah, and that's just one body also. And so I don't think we can necessarily make decisions based on what may happen in the House or Senate.
Yeah. Just
So
sometimes knowing which bills at least made it to that point gives us a sense of what might go all the way through in this session. But if we won't know, then we won't know. I guess we have to get comfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so if we were to change this to having this kind of conversation about the uncertainty and how we deal with that uncertainty in our work and the implications for the kind of thing we put out for public comment and the level of sort of caveating or other kind of language, that seems like a useful conversation to have. I just want to test, yeah? And probably not frame it in like, hey, do we move the July 1st deadline? That's not the way to frame this thing up. Okay, great. That was really helpful. Any other quick follow-up on that? Because what we'll do is we'll redo this, how it's put in the agenda to reflect this conversation. Okay, great. So I want to pause because we said we do public comment right around now. I want to pause for that. Let me just go see what we've missed in terms of not. We haven't looked ahead to February 10th, and we haven't done a quick thing on the draft in writing responsibilities. Why don't we do a quick pause for public comment because we're at that time, and let's do like 5-minute hits on the drafting and writing responsibilities in Feb 10. And we basically solved that last conversation we were just talking about anyway. So if you've been joining our meeting today and you'd like to make a comment, this is a great time to do it. You can raise your hand, drop something in the chat, or there's so few of us. If you want to just come off mic and say hello, we're trying to keep it to 2 minutes or less for public comments. But if you've been joining our meeting today and you'd like to comment on the conversation, now's the time to do it. Okay, great. Feel free to drop something in the chat if that would be a better way to comment for you right now. Okay, great. So why don't we circle back to the things we haven't picked up yet in today's agenda, and that is one of them is the drafting and writing responsibilities. Although, can I just say before I do that, does anybody have any last thoughts on the agenda for next Monday? We went deep on a couple things, but if I just step back, like anything else before we finish up on the agenda for next week that folks want to mention? Okay.
David, did
Yeah.
we have like a significant time for introductions? We have so many new council members. I'd just like to make sure there's space on the agenda for that kind of
You know,
introduction.
we don't do that at the top of the thing. And part of what we're trying to do with Indra is to make that happen, but that's lower down on the agenda. And so what if we put a little more time at the top for some introductions and people actually greeting each other properly for the first time?
Thank you.
Yeah, let's do that. Nice idea. Anything else for next Monday?
David, real quick, I was just going to
Yeah.
say Liz has been helping support us in trying to get another steering committee member from the House. And if you're doing introductions, it might be nice as Liz introduces herself to speak to her role here and then acknowledge that there's a vacancy with the House appointed member.
I'd be happy to do that. I did not get any. I did send just a note out to the House appointees just to let them know. So I'd be happy to.
Thanks, Liz. Okay. Jane, do you want to say a word about the writing responsibilities that and I can share my screen and you can share your screen as you wish.
Yeah, I can turn this over to you, Liz, too, but I'll just say quickly, there is a whole, Liz has been working really hard to ensure counselor representation for the chapters that include substance around recommendations for drafting. And I think we're pretty close, if not totally complete, on having all of those sections accounted for through counselors. And then again, CAO staff sort of covering the chapters that are really around administration and process, and or any technical work, understanding that counselors will still have a chance to review the tone and drafting of that as well. And for this, there are a number of chapters where we acknowledge that it should be set by the steering committee and a rep to draft those chapters. Wanted to touch base because we haven't heard back from any of you volunteering on these. And so just wanted to confirm that that is hitting the right note with all of you. See if we could garner any volunteers, or if you'd prefer us going out more broadly to the council and or how to work collaboratively on those chapters. And most of the chapters that the steering committee has covered aren't due till the June sort of putting together of the whole plan. But yeah, just wanted to pause and say that. And then as I'm looking at this, I'm just going to flag right now out loud for you, David, that we'll need to schedule the idea of updating the land acknowledgement at one of the council meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I see two here. One is this letter from the council. Another is the acknowledgements. Maybe there's others down here. Oh yeah. Sort of the lead into the top priority actions, like how to frame those up. That one actually has a March 1st date.
And we can decide if that makes sense or not. I think those, so yeah, climate council next steps. That might be something, that is a chapter that the last time we talked about, maybe it was you, Jared, who acknowledged that in the interim time between plans, a lot of the administration or where the public should be turning is to the climate office. So we could sort of say climate council next steps and climate action office and give that to us, if that makes sense. I don't see why that needs to be a steering committee rep, except for review of the way we draft that. Just really speaks to what happened, how the climate council operates during a time of like not high intensity meetings. So.
Okay. So it's hard to raise your hand right now, I imagine, but actually excellent. Secretary Clark, go ahead.
Hi, since I'm relatively new to this group, can you provide some context in terms of who would have drafted these portions in the last plan? And maybe it worked differently for the original. That would help give me some context.
I think the letter from the council was to steering committee members who wrote it last time, perhaps Lauren and Chris. I can't remember exactly, but it was the steering committee who drafted that. It sort of sets the tone, like is the intro to the report and the cap. I did write the executive summary last time and will acknowledge that that's a spot where I'm happy and have put my name there to do that on your behalf, but that will certainly be something that you all will want to review, if not have led writing, since it really does also is the other place that sets tone. And then acknowledgements, it's a brief section. We could probably acknowledge the CAO just updates the acknowledgements from last time and as a starting place for a review by folks if you people are comfortable with that. So I feel like it's the letter from the council is really the one that should be written by the council, and everything else, if folks are comfortable, we can put CAO and move it forward that way.
Gary?
Thanks for that question.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate Jane's suggestion, both further down on, sorry, Dave, if you can scroll just so I get the exact language right, in terms of,
This one.
yeah, the next steps. I think that sounds good to me, Jane, if Climate Action Office can draft that and then have that reviewed. And I think the same would go for the acknowledgements. That sounds great to me. I think also just because in terms of there's going to be I feel like folks in the CAO are going to have a sense of everybody who contributed to the chapters and the public comment process. In terms of the letter from the council and the top priority recommendations, I'd be happy to be part of a writing team for those. Although I do agree that on the top priority recommendations, that timeline may need to be shifted back, depending on where that process goes. But
Thanks, Jared. Yeah.
I agree on that.
Okay.
Yeah, it might be that the top priority actions are included in the public draft or however we frame it, and that the section that is framing it and discussing it is left till June 1st.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this? Thanks, folks. The last conversation we want to have was about the February 10th council meeting. The bulk of that meeting is focused on the Cap and Invest technical report. We'll probably want to put a few other things in that meeting just to keep the rest of the process going forward. But the bulk of that, it's going to be a virtual meeting, 3 hours. And the reason we brought it up is there was a suggestion last council meeting, that maybe we should invite in people from other states who have experience. You know, speaking with some folks afterwards, it's maybe, I think. And so I'd be interested in steering committee if right now you want to provide a little guidance here about, should we be trying to locate people from other states and help? Would that be helpful? Or should we focus really on the report, which does capture experience from other states? So that's the question. Jane?
Well, I'll just frame it a little differently and say
Please.
that
Please.
as part of the work in the report, there was outreach done to other states. State programs were met with and discussed with California, Washington, Quebec, and New York, and there's information on that in the report. That will certainly be summarized by the consultants as part of their presentation, and understanding that's an interest from counselors. We can make sure that they elevate that in their presentation. I think the call to action about inviting other states, I'm just going to put it out there that that's not something our office intends to do, and that if counselors want other state reps there, that there's a timing consideration of the meeting, and that work would have to be done by folks outside of our office.
Thanks, Jane.
my
Jared, thoughts?
my recollection is that recommendation had come from Joey Miller, and I know that she also has colleagues and contacts in states that manage Camp and Invest programs, especially Washington. Given what Jane just said, it feels like it would be appropriate, given that was, Joey as a counselor's recommendation, to follow up with her to see if that's something that she would want to pursue. I do think that it could make a lot of sense to include space for that, because it's one thing to have a report presented, the information presented, but to have a view from the folks who are actually implementing, administering the programs on the ground. I think it can be helpful to have a peer state perspective, and just, so I certainly think that could be valuable, and I think it's worth following up with Joey about her suggestion and recommendation to see if that's something that she's willing and interested to move forward.
Okay. Thanks, Jared. Other views, similar views, different views? Kelly?
Having seen the report or heard the report from the folks, from the contractors, they may cover all of what I would want to hear from another state in there. But I do know that if this is going to be a recommendation that we put forward, there's going to need to be a lot of education about what this kind of program is and what it isn't. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I just, maybe that should be part of our agenda, is like, how do we help it, what, and that may be something that a rep from another state who's actually been implementing could help with. How did they help with the conversation with the legislature or the administration or the public, and helping people understand that this is going to be a net benefit. So that's my biggest concern, is getting the education piece done, if this ends up being part of a recommendation.
Thanks, Kelly. Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation actually goes beyond that, and we need to maybe start with what options are actually available to Vermont. The New York Climate Initiative hasn't moved forward. I think we're expecting it might by the end of the last calendar year, but it still doesn't exist, which means our only real option, based on the consultant's advice in the Cap and Invest study, that Vermont can't go this alone, is to look at the Western Climate Initiative and a price point of about 30 cents a gallon. And I think we need to be very transparent with folks that is the current state of affairs in terms of options that sit in front of us, before maybe getting into, Kelly, some of the more detailed messaging about program. Is just first making sure there's an understanding across the council of what our options actually look like at this moment.
Okay. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. We need to jump. I'm not sure I feel particularly resolved on this, though. I would say, Jared, if you want, unless folks don't want Jared to do this, Jared, if you want to follow up with Joey and see what you had in mind, and then circle back with me, because I want to make sure that from an agenda standpoint, we're dedicating the right amount of time, the right amount of stuff, right? So if folks are okay with Jared following up with Joey, who would you invite and why? We can circle back next Monday when we're all together at the council and maybe make a decision about what to do. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Okay. Anything else, folks, before we finish up? Okay. I've certainly got some to-dos about fixing the piece of the agenda. We're going to fix that Google sheet and just turn it into a Google form that could never be confused as any kind of collaboration. And we really look forward to seeing everybody on Monday. I'm really looking forward to it. I think
Just
it's
to
going to
note,
be.
I did email our general counsel, and she's typically very timely in getting back to me so I'll let you know about if the work needed to move it to a Google form as soon as possible, if
Thanks,
needed.
Jane.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think that's it, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good week. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.